Well, let's get this show on the road. We've got a lot to cover today. So let's in the chat. Actually, can you go back up to the opening slide, Rihanna? There we go. Thank you. In the chat, certainly feel free to those of you that are filing in now, add your name and affiliation. We'd love to know who's in the room. We know that we've got over 400 folks registered for this, and folks are kind of coming in from all over. We'll get a better sense of that in a little bit, but I'd like to welcome everyone. Good morning and welcome to Recycle the Runoff. It's a technical workshop and a roadmap for stormwater diversions. We have a few housekeeping items. As people continue to log on, know that as with many of the Zoom webinars you've been on before, you will be muted and your camera will be off. Our presenters will be highlighted while they're presenting. We are recording this workshop, so that will make it available on the website following today. Usually we get those up in about a week or so. It's good to have Charlie Wilson with the Southern California Water Coalition as my co-host today. I'll pass it on to him in a couple of minutes, and I'd like to, next slide, Rihanna, thank everyone for joining us today. In addition to LA County Sanitation Districts for bringing their expertise to this workshop, and to Charlie for being a faithful and fun partner on this as we kind of figure out how diversions fit into the toolbox. It's been great having them as a collaborating partner. I'd also like to thank CASCA and SCAP CASA for being collaborative partners on this webinar, and to Jacobs for sponsoring this. Next slide. The Council for Watershed Health has a long history in convening folks on topics of interest, this being one of them. Our mission is to advance the health and sustainability of our region's watersheds, rivers and habitats, both in natural areas and in urban neighborhoods. And we do this through science-based research, education, and inclusive stakeholder engagement. Again, this webinar being one way that we do that. And we acknowledge that the land in our watersheds are unceded ancestral homelands of the Gabrielino, Ferdinando, Barbareno, and Ventureño. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose homelands we live and who are the ancestral caretakers of the land, the water, and the life of our watersheds. We recognize that they are still present, and we honor their elders, both past and present, and their descendants. The Council for Watershed Health is undertaking several initiatives to listen and understand and support the Native peoples of our region, and we look forward to continuing this work in the months and years ahead. And the stewardship of our watershed brings us here today to learn about runoff diversions as one of the tools in the toolbox for managing runoff. Our conversations with various agencies, including LA County Sanitation Districts, we've gained a better understanding, and we're starting to learn about both dry weather and wet weather diversions and how this fits into the work that we do. We've gained insight from the Las Virgenes' Metropolitan Water District paper prepared by Jacobs and released recently this past August. That paper, entitled Tapping the Available Capacity, is also known as the second white paper. And in that paper, a number of key findings and lessons learned related to dry weather diversions and the potential for wet weather diversions has become a resource for us. And we encourage you to take a look at that paper if you haven't already, because it's led us here today to talk about the technical aspects of diversions. From the interest that we have and the interest we know that is out there, the conversations, as I mentioned, there's over 450 people that registered for this webinar. So there's a keen interest in what these projects are, how they fit into how we manage water, our water resources. And the questions many of you provided as you registered are what has helped inform the program today. So we know there's a keen interest in learning more, and we're excited to have everyone here with us today. One thing I want to point out is my background. It is one of the projects that we're learning about. It is the Manhattan Beach Pump Plant Dry Weather Diversion Project and Storage at Pollywog Park Pond. And this is, one example that we're learning from. So let me get us to our agenda today, and then I'll pass it on to Charlie to introduce our first speaker. We have Mark Lombos from CASCA, Steve Jepsen from SCAP, and then from the LA County Sanitation Districts, we have Kristen Ruffell, Erika Bensch, Peter Carlstrom, Rosann Paracuelles, and Danielle Thomas. And then we'll follow up with some Q&A and we'll wrap up the day, although we have those reversed here in the agenda. But we'll do Q&A before we do the wrap up, just be assured. And I just realized, Rihanna, are we good to do a poll really quick just to kind of gauge interest? Yeah. I think I may have missed that possibility, but let's get to it now. All right, so we have a poll. I was supposed to do this earlier. The question is, what are you most interested in learning about today? And you can go ahead and start doing it. Types of diversion projects, water quality benefits and risks, the permitting and design in O&M processes, or the role diversions play in stormwater. And as we start to see the rankings come in, we've got the types of diversion projects and the permitting, design, and construction and O&M processes right about the same, about 50% and 46% respectively. And those are topics that we have on our agenda that we'll do a little bit deeper dive. And good to know that we've hit, that we've got a program that's going to address these interests. All right. Let's see. Let me move this out of the way so I can see what's next. And let's get to our first presenters. First, I'd like to introduce Charles Wilson. Charlie has been, again, a partner on this for a number of months. We're excited to have him here. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning, Eileen. Thank you. And on behalf of the over 200 members of Southern California Water Coalition, I'm really, really pleased and proud to be able to help co-host today's seminar on stormwater. I mean, we began this kind of venture ourselves a couple of years ago as we look at water in its totality and sort of that all the above approach. But we found very clearly that stormwater and stormwater related issues become really an interesting and critical new component that's driving a lot of interest. And Eileen, as you said, when we had done our earlier webinars on this issue, kind of at that 30,000 foot, and we begin to drill down, the first white paper that we produced with the help of Jacobs, we had over 5,000 downloads. And that really told us that we were onto something with stormwater. And now that this phase 2 paper is available, we're going to talk about the elements of that today. Not that I'm competitive or anything, but if they go to socalwater.org, you can actually get phase 2 of this white paper, download it, and really start to drill in yourselves based on what our folks are going to share with us today. So enough of me, more of our guests is always good. So I want to be able to dive right straight in. And I want to be able to introduce Mark Lombos. He's a principal engineer at LA County Public Works. He is also here today representing the California Stormwater Quality Association. He's going to talk or start us off with MS4 permittees and statewide perspectives. Mark, welcome. And what do you got for us?
Good morning, and thank you, Charlie, for that introduction. And thank you to the Council for Watershed Health and LA County Sanitation District for hosting today's workshop. I'm honored to be part of today's distinguished panel. And as a stormwater program manager for LA County, I look forward to the discussion and learning from everyone. With my presentation today, I will briefly introduce CASCA as an organization, provide a statewide perspective on sustainable stormwater management, and then tie that in with the efforts to recycle the runoff. Next slide, please. So just some background on the California Stormwater Quality Association, CASCA for short. We are a nonprofit organization that advances sustainable stormwater management protective of California's water resources. Our membership is comprised of municipalities at federal, state, and local levels, ports, universities and school districts, wastewater agencies, water suppliers, industries, and consulting firms throughout the state. We provide statewide perspective and leadership on issues that impact all stormwater programs. And our fundamental approach to stormwater is being collaborative, speaking through a collective voice, building impactful bridges with water board members and staff. And we're looking to utilizing that same approach and advocacy with legislative work. Next slide, please. In 2019, CASCA developed its strategic plan, which outlines who we are as an organization. CASCA provides leadership that results in sustainable statewide stormwater policies, regulations, and programs. Through collaboration, we provide a forum for stormwater professionals to share ideas, identify solutions for regulatory, technical, and scientific challenges. We also produce resources and host events that inform, educate, and train stormwater professionals, regulators, and the public on the value and challenges and scientific and technical aspects of stormwater management. 2 weeks ago, we actually held our annual conference. It's always a great opportunity to learn about all the cool things happening at stormwater. And similar to last year, we held it virtually and had about almost 900 attendees. And we're looking forward to returning to an in-person conference format next year. And then in terms of support, CASQA develops tools and guidance to promote implementation of sustainable stormwater programs. And finally, CASQA provides opportunities for the growth of stormwater professionals and development of current and future stormwater leaders. Next slide, please. So sustainability is defined as satisfying the needs of the present without compromising the capacity of future generations and guaranteeing the balance between economic growth, care for the environment, and social well-being. And this is most applicable when it comes to California's water resources. In October 2020, CASQA released its vision for stormwater with the following 4 principles. Principle 1 is program implementation. Principle 2 deals with permits, regulations, and legislation. Principle 3 is about public education, and principle 4 is funding. Next slide, please. So principle 1, projects and programs that use stormwater as a resource, protect water quality and beneficial uses, and efficiently minimizes pollution are critical for sustainable stormwater management. This really starts with embracing the concept of one water and maximizing stormwater capture. California continues to face statewide drought conditions. According to the most recent data from the National Integrated Drought Information System, 100% of the state is currently experiencing moderate drought, and over 83% of the state is experiencing extreme drought. And at the statewide scale, municipalities are working together to identify ways to capture as much stormwater as possible, with the end goal of capturing more water locally and creating more resilient communities, both from a water quality and water supply. Stormwater capture can also provide other benefits beyond water resiliency. By applying a multi-benefit approach, stormwater capture projects provide opportunities to add more green spaces and parks that create more livable and enjoyable neighborhoods. These opportunities also include building up green infrastructure along our roadways and sidewalks. Up in the Bay Area, the City-County Association of Governments of San Mateo County recently developed a Green Streets Master Plan just to do that. And similarly, here in Los Angeles County, LA County Public Works developed and are implementing a Green Streets Master Plan for the unincorporated county areas. These community scale benefits amplify the value of such investments, particularly for underserved communities. Principle 2 is collaboration on permits, regulations, and legislations are key in supporting actionable items towards sustainable stormwater management. My colleagues after me will probably speak more on legislation, but it is critical to promote legislations that provide mechanisms to maximize stormwater capture. On September 3, 2021, CASQA was a co-signee along with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies and other organizations on a letter to Governor Newsom in strong support of SB 273, further reinforcing the concept of one water. Next slide, please. Principle 3, public awareness, understanding, and appreciation and support of the value of stormwater is essential to sustainable stormwater management. Implementation of stormwater projects requires support from elected officials and the public. Most, if not all, municipal stormwater programs are funded through their local general fund, and budget allocations for projects and programs that address water quality require strong support from elected officials and budget decision makers. The proper messaging can determine whether or not a project receives the necessary funding. The lack of public support can delay and sometimes halt a project. Public education and collaboration with key stakeholders are necessary to ensure that when a project is implemented, The local community supports the project and embraces it as a key component of their local infrastructure. And the final principle is about funding. Significant financial investments are required to achieve sustainable stormwater management. Most stormwater programs in California lack dedicated funding. And as I mentioned earlier, almost all municipalities rely solely on their local general fund. Out of necessity, stormwater programs need to be flexible, adaptive, and creative when it comes to funding multi-benefit stormwater capture projects. Taking advantage of existing infrastructure such as storm drains and sewer systems is a great way to leverage partnerships and resources and to provide potential capital improvement and long-term O&M cost savings. Diversions of stormwater to sewer is not meant to fill the funding gaps, but it's a creative option to achieving multiple outcomes and benefits. And so to wrap up, diversion of dry weather or wet weather stormwater to those sewer and wastewater systems is in alignment with CASCA's vision for stormwater. It's an essential tool in the stormwater capture toolbox. It's a great way to maximize the capture of stormwater, improving our water quality and increasing water supply. Using a multi-benefit approach and integrating green infrastructure BMPs provide opportunities for enhancing local communities. Legislation such as SB 273 support actionable steps towards sustainable stormwater management, and public education and awareness on the value of stormwater ensures success during public implementation. And the leveraging of partnerships, the leveraging of funding create opportunities to protect our water resource and implement community altering projects. Next slide, please. On behalf of CASCA, thank you again for the opportunity to present this morning, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You touched on a number of topics that we're going to get into a little bit later. Certainly those multiple benefits are always on our mind as we think about how we get to a sustainable water resource approach. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit later. And I'm wanting to kind of move into getting us to how did we get here today? A number of the questions that we heard from registrants coming into signing up for the webinar related to policy and how we got to where we are, and if dry season diversions if and how they will play a safe role in helping to address stormwater pollutants before they move into projects. So with us today, we've invited Steve, excuse me, Steve Jepsen from the Southern California Alliance Publicly Owned Treatment Works to provide us with a perspective on the benefits of stormwater diversions. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I'm Steve Jepsen, the Executive Director for SCAP, and we represent over 80 water, wastewater agencies in Southern California, providing regulatory advocacy and training for our members. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for a little perspective, let's start with a quick review of some water quality history. Public sewers were constructed way back in 800 BC in Rome. Some of these clay sewers still exist today. They had public latrines that were flushed with recycled public bathwater. The next big push was during the Industrial Revolution in London. Tremendous growth of the cities quickly led to terribly overpolluted streets and waterways, acting as a constant source of outbreak for disease and a shortage of labor. During the Great Stink of 1858, British Parliament resolved to create a modern sewer system and constructed 100 miles of sewer to divert waste away from the city center. The death toll in London immediately dropped. Epidemics of cholera and other diseases were curtailed, and they were back to a reliable workforce for that industrial revolution. So fast forward to the Porter-Cologne Act, which brought us expanded authority of the 9 regional water quality control boards, basin plans, and the policy states the quality of all waters of the state shall be protected. All activities affecting water quality will be regulated to attain the highest water quality that's reasonable considering the uses. Next was the Clean Water Act. Strong water quality protection language, NPDES permits, and massive construction of secondary treatment plants all across the United States with substantial funding from the federal government through EPA. 20 years later, the focus became on collection systems. CMOM, Capacity Management Operations and Maintenance, a federal regulation, and the more recent Sanitary Sewer, WDR, regulating the sewer collection systems with system performance data regularly uploaded to CWIX, a state database, and the requirements to prepare and maintain sewer system management plans. These policies have produced good results, and we're having far fewer spills. Then there's also the stormwater, MS4 WDR, focused on cleaning up stormwater. Despite all this progress, we still have water quality issues in our watersheds. So we're not done yet. The benefits of stormwater diversions are that they can help with the challenges we have with water quality in the watershed. Next slide, please. So the original purpose of POTWs is to treat pee and poo, really designed to transport and treat pee and poo, not metals or pesticides or industrial chemicals. The POTWs treat, disinfect, and discharge the treated water to the ocean or to streams. In some cases, stream discharge is required to maintain environmental flows through the NPDES permit system. When there's a demand and it makes economic sense for public ratepayers, POTWs do additional treatment to make recycled water for irrigation, agriculture, and manufacturing, and soon we'll have several large-scale potable projects coming online. Next slide, please. In the process of cleaning human wastewater, we make recycled water, biosolids that are usually used for soil amendments, biogas, mostly methane, which is used to generate on-site heat to improve the treatment process, to generate on-site energy, to power the POTW, and used as a low-carbon vehicle fuel, 90% less NOx than diesel. And in a few cases, the biogas is scrubbed and injected into the energy provider's natural gas pipe system. So what about adding stormwater treatment to the POTW portfolio? Next slide, please. Well, wastewater systems are a great cleaning tool. Sewer systems are widespread where anthropogenic influence can affect water quality. There are 120,000 miles of collection system piping in California. That is halfway to the moon. There's hundreds of wastewater treatment plants in all types of communities in California. Collection systems and POTW discharges, water, air, and biosolids are all highly regulated and closely monitored to protect public health and the environment. With infrastructure coverage in populated areas all over the state, wastewater systems can be a great tool for cleaning more than just pee and poo. We're already cleaning commercial and industrial wastewater, brewery waste, and food waste, with much more food waste coming soon as part of air quality initiatives. So why not do more for the watershed? Next slide, please. So shifting gears a little, for a second, how many workers do we think are at a typical treatment plant? Of course, the numbers varies with the size of the plant, but what do you think the average is? Just take a look and put an answer in your head. Next slide, please. Well, if you picked none of the above, you were right. There are billions of tiny microorganisms doing the work of cleaning the water. These workers need a regular food source to thrive. Changing the food source or food ratio as what happens when large amounts of rainwater enter the system can be a problem. Salts and pesticides, among other constituents, can also be a problem. Next slide, please. So when significant changes in flow or new constituents enter the plant, the workers can die and the plant will be upset. Permit conditions will not be met. Sewer treatment plants have strict discharge requirements that rely on the plant performing at optimum levels. This is why stormwater diversions need to be planned, designed, and managed carefully, as our LACSD team will discuss. Next slide, please. So protecting the treatment plant is one barrier to stormwater diversion, but this can be overcome with source control, pre-treatment, testing, and good design. A previous barrier to stormwater diversions were legal restrictions. Irvine Ranch Water District, Orange County Sanitation District, and LA County Sanitation Districts passed their own specific legislation to implement diversion projects, but this is a heavy lift for smaller agencies. So as Mark mentioned earlier, on September 23, the governor signed SB 273. This CASA Coastkeeper bill that was also supported by CASQA provides authority for all types of wastewater agencies to accept, treat, and discharge stormwater where it is viable and economically feasible. Next slide, please. So how to get started? Well, first you need to know your audience. There's two differences. Typically, a city or county that has stormwater quality responsibilities is different from a special district or a JPA that does not. Special district type agencies are going to be focused on their wastewater responsibilities. A local satellite or collection system may be part of a regional treatment plant who manages the pretreatment source control program. So there could be two agencies to deal with for a diversion, collection and treatment. For starters, we should look at the agency's website. Does the wastewater agency have stormwater diversion guidelines or policies? Where is the POTW located in relation to the proposed diversion? What types of effluent does the POTW produce? Are there local limits? What type of constituents will or could the stormwater contain? Will the POTW be able to handle these constituents? Two things that, of course, must not happen: a plant upset or a sewer overflow. Either of these events can affect public health and the environment and bring hefty fines. Next slide, please. So what's next? Many agencies have successfully implemented dry weather diversions for bacteria management in coastal areas. Now agencies are exploring more upstream diversions and controlled wet weather diversions. As part of a recent Southern California Water Coalition webinar, Susan Moisio with Jacobs Engineering talked about smart systems, allowing collection system operators to monitor and remotely regulate diversions real time as system capacity allows. Richard Loeffler with Xylem has presented to us on how combined systems in the Midwest and East Coast are using artificial intelligence with models and real-time sensors to minimize combined system discharges during storm events, saving ratepayers money with an immediate return on investment. I think next steps will be linking land use types, constituents of concern from those land use types, sensitivity of receiving water, such as special habitat, recreational uses, and drinking water supply, to prioritize diversion projects. We'll see hybrid approaches where stormwater capture, diversion, and recycling projects may incorporate dry weather and first flush to the wastewater system, cleaner flows to habitat, and excess clean flow to drinking water supply. If the capture diversion systems can be scaled up and combined to provide flood attenuation, we've hit the jackpot. With substantial state funding for water quality budgeted this year and indications that there'll be another budget surplus next year, these projects may become a reality sooner than we think. Getting to this reality will require collaboration from all water sectors and regulatory support. Source control will be crucial. CASA has had recent successes with wipes labeling legislation and supported PFAS control legislation. True Source Control will be working together on strong product stewardship getting products with undesirable constituents out of our lives in the first place, rather than using ratepayer funds to clean up compounds that shouldn't have been there in the first place. This is something we can all get behind and work together. So now back to our current reality. Next slide, please. Let it rain, and let's hear how LACSD will collect it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And my apologies for the coughing fit that helped me mingle your name. But we'll recover. I've got a glass of water here to kind of keep my words going smoothly. And with that, you raised a lot of really important issues about one in particular, kind of keeping that pollution out of the water, out of the runoff. That's something that we are constantly grappling with. The council has been doing a number of initiatives looking at trash assessments and pollutants as part of the monitoring that we do around green infrastructure. And I know that we're going to need to continue that conversation of how do we keep those pollutants out of the runoff, because those are going to be an important part as to how we manage these diversions. And with that, I'd like to introduce Kristen. She's going to lead us off with the LA County Sanitation team's presentations. We heard from a number of you about what to consider as part of diversion projects for both dry and wet weather. What are the appropriate types of diversions, and what are some existing examples? And I shared one in my background earlier on, and we've got Kristen here to lead us off with that roadmap to diversions so that we can get a better understanding about what's involved, what's to be considered, and how do we prioritize these and think about diversions as an appropriate tool in the toolbox. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Mark and Steve, for setting the statewide perspective. So for these next few presentations, we'll drill into how diversions are developed in the southeastern portion of Los Angeles County, served by the sanitation districts. And this figure shows the backbone of our sewage collections and treatment system. It's approximately 1,400 miles of sewer and 11 wastewater treatment plants. And overall, the districts convey and treat approximately half the wastewater produced in Los Angeles County. The sanitation districts have been part of the solution for water quality issues at storm drain outfalls for a number of years. The red dots at the bottom of this figure show early dry weather diversion projects to our sewer system. They were concentrated along the coast at storm drains that discharged to the beach to protect swimmer health. And they have been a cost-effective solution to beach water quality issues in dry weather. And they have provided our agency with some time to become comfortable with diversions to our sewer system. So although we had accepted coastal low flow diversions as industrial waste, we actually didn't have the statutory authority to help with stormwater, as Steve mentioned, and that's where SB 45 came in. SB 45 became effective in 2016, and once our powers were activated by the Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, we were able to begin helping local jurisdictions with their stormwater challenges. Unfortunately, SB 45 did not come with funding, and we are specifically restricted from using sewer service fees for stormwater. So as a result, our authority from LAFCO restricted us to provide service that was paid for by the local jurisdiction requesting our help. Additionally, I want to draw attention to the lower right box. Uniquely, SB 485 requires a consultation with the local water master, the flood control district, and the water replenishment district. We found that it makes the most sense for the project proponent to lead this consultation with the district's participation. And it's the first thing that has to happen with any new projects coming to the district. Although it's not required by SB 273, it may well be best practice to avoid water rights surprises later in the process. So the thought of a stormwater diversion into the sewer strikes fear into the hearts of many sewer operators. In fact, uncontrolled diversion during a storm would certainly lead to sewer overflows. It's helpful to remember that permitted diversions are controlled and to look at types of diversions on a continuum from lower risk to higher risk. At the lowest level, dry weather diversions are typically very low flow and occur only during dry weather. In general, we found that those are safe over time. And at the highest risk permitted diversion, we would be looking at real-time diversion from distant from a treatment plant. While we have not accepted diversions of this type, we are looking at what it would take to develop the risk-based framework and controls necessary. More on that in a bit. And then in between, we have diversions that we have just recently accepted, and I have some examples for you later in the presentation. So taking a step back, it's helpful to understand what sort of data we currently have available to make these decisions. As I mentioned, we have a large system, 1,400 miles of sewer, and we clearly can't monitor everywhere all of the time. Our flow monitoring program consists of monitoring key locations in each sewer on a 4 to 5 year cycle. The monitoring is typically conducted during a 2-week dry weather window. And our talented staff in the sewage system management section use the data and their best professional judgment to produce diagrams that show the clearance or available capacity in our sewers during peak dry weather flow at that specific location. For diversions that operate only during dry weather, we have good data available to evaluate if we can accept them. In many, but not all cases, we can accept a low flow diversion. If we don't have capacity during peak flow periods, we evaluate travel times to the critical sewer, and we can evaluate off-peak capacity. During this work, we are conscious of other diversion projects to the same tributary. Additionally, but not all, for all but the low flow diversions, we require variable speed pumps to better manage diversion flow rates and protect the sewer. Sewers operate better when they have steady inputs. Pumps designed to manage wet weather flow are significantly oversized for dry weather and can stress our system if used on a fill and draw cycle during dry weather. Many of you probably don't think that a separate sewer system like we have here in Southern California has issues during rainstorms, but sewer operators will tell you that that's what keeps them up at night. Whether it's from illegal connections, flooded streets, or another cause, sewer systems experience inflow and infiltration during wet weather, and we don't have the ability to stop the flow once it's in our system. The figures here illustrate the effects of wet weather. The figure on the left is the flow in an example sewer during rain in January of 2019. The red line on the graph is our maximum safe sewer flow, which corresponds to the depth of flow that's 75% of the diameter of the sewer pipe, shown in the figure on the right. The black horizontal line is a full pipe. Flows greater than this create a backup in our system, and while they don't always create a sewer overflow because we have space in the manholes, they do create a significant risk of sewer overflow that has to be avoided. So even though we probably have capacity during dry weather, as shown on this figure, we don't currently have a way of safely determining capacity during a storm or predicting the capacity at all points downstream for the very long travel time, around sometimes up to 8 hours, that the flow will be traveling in our sewers. So what do we need if we were to move in this direction? We're being asked about what it takes to sort of bring in the boundaries. And the figure on the left shows the real-time rainfall gauges in Los Angeles County. These data are useful for getting a regional sense of rainfall, but they don't tell us if an intense cell sits between gauges. And for that, we would need gauge-adjusted radar rainfall data. The figure on the right is an example, clearly not Los Angeles County, but an example of what gauge-adjusted radar rainfall data looks like. The circles with the Ys in the middle are the gauges in that area. And the gauge-adjusted radar rainfall data takes the radar rainfall data, correlates it with what's hitting the ground at the known gauges, and provides a grid 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer that can be used to identify intense rainfall that occurs between the gauges, and also would provide specific geolocated data that can be used for control in the future. So the process to move towards a real-time diversion, phase 1 is get the data, both rainfall and real-time sewer flow, and start to understand how they impact each other, develop rules for what represents safe conditions, and then develop predictive logic to identify conditions that may lead to problems in the next 8 hours. Depending on where you are, that's the travel time in the sewer. So the bottom line for wet weather is although projects that need conveyance in the sewer system can store stormwater and divert it during dry weather, this is a project that we can evaluate and implement today. Real-time diversion to treatment plants are possible. Modeling would be required to evaluate capacity, and it needs to be understood that at least in our system, our upstream plants relieve capacity from downstream sewers, and they have to prioritize the sewage before stormwater, but there is some capacity there. We currently can't accept real-time diversions in the sewer system today, but we're working with the County of Los Angeles to consider this in the future. More on that in a bit. And all diversions to the sanitary sewer that involve stormwater need variable speed pumps. So there's a lot on this slide, but the takeaway is that the risk from a diversion increases what's required in terms of the capacity determination. Also, the control system becomes more complex. If real-time evaluations in the real-time evaluations, the capacity determinations involve modeling, and the control system involves monitoring the level in the sewer and a permissive signal from the sanitation districts. Yet all projects involve a control system that allow the sanitation districts to shut down the pumps in case of an emergency. So I'm going to go through a few examples. I could probably give a presentation of this same length on either of them. These will be truncated. Those of you who have more questions can follow up with me in the future, but I'll go through examples of some of these various types of projects that are either currently in design or construction or are being contemplated. So Carriage Crest was the first project that the sanitation districts took on after our SB 485 authority was activated. It was initially a dry weather infiltration project, and it was determined infeasible to do infiltration because of existing groundwater contamination. The city of Carson contracted with the sanitation districts to help develop the project. And one of the things I'd like to point out on this screen, it is directly across the street from our largest wastewater treatment plant, the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. Early feasibility evaluations for a sewer diversion at this location showed that while it was technically feasible, the fee to connect to the sewer was cost prohibitive because of the high flow rates. It was over $3 million. The sanitation districts considered the fact that we have unused capacity in our system due to water conservation, and that the ratepayers, that our ratepayers and the ratepayers in our sewer system for the stormwater system are the same people. And so we were able to relieve our connection fee for local governmental diversions using unused capacity. This connection fee relief, we find most consultants don't know about this when they are consulting with other municipal clients, and we would encourage them to include connection fee relief as a factor when they are evaluating projects for local governmental agencies. This slide just is an overview of how this project works. Stormwater is diverted out of the storm drain through a drop inlet structure. It goes through a pretreatment system for a hydrodynamic separator into subsurface storage, which basically ends up being flow equalization, so that it can be held when the sewer does not have capacity and can divert when the sewer does have capacity, and then it's diverted to a 60-inch sewer line to go across the street to the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. This figure down here in the right is a representation of how the modeling needs to occur, where you look at the model for what the sewer can take and look at various diversion rates into the BMP, various diversion rates out of the BMP up to the sewer capacity, and then the BMP size, so that you can optimize the system to have the smallest storage possible that gets to your design goals. So there were two projects on my example list for stored stormwater projects. I won't say much about them. They are in development and the sanitation districts are not leading them. They're County of Los Angeles projects, but there's one at Adventure Park in near the city of Whittier, and there's one Alondra Park near Lawndale. And both of these projects use a very large cistern. Although these could be stored stormwater projects, the county has filters where they will be filtering a significant amount of the rainwater and sending it back to the storm drain. So these projects actually, although they're storing stormwater, for all intents and purposes, they're operating as dry weather diversions with single speed pumps. There is more capacity in these sewers, and if the county ever wishes to operate these as stored stormwater diversions, we would be able to look at upgrades for these. So when I talked about that we were moving towards real-time diversions, so we're investigating with the county a project to look at an early real-time diversion. Specifically, the county was looking at increasing diversion or putting in a diversion at Obregon Park, shown here. The sewers downstream of Obregon Park are fairly small, and the storm drain that they would be diverting out of was actually tributary to another diversion that they were developing at LA River Segment B. And so we're working with them. They are looking at this portion of, how to size an Obregon Park system and put in a smart system, and then time the discharge from Obregon Park back to the back to the storm drain system to go downstream to the diversion. And then the sanitation districts portion of this, you can see that this is the sewer diversion from Obregon Park, and our very long system in between there and where the water would eventually be treated at the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant. We know that this sewer has excess capacity during dry weather and no capacity during significant storms. We have currently a skated tide control system or sewer level system at this location, which is a key location in our system for capacity. And then we have the ability where this sewer runs by a piece of property that the sanitation districts operate at the Southgate transfer station as another interim place for flow monitoring. We're starting to develop the elements of this project and look at integrating real-time rainfall data to see what we can do there. The next project that I wanted to mention is just starting to be discussed. The City of Long Beach is working on a wetland project at El Dorado Park. And this project is also right across the street from a treatment plant, the Sanitation District's Long Beach WRP. And this would be the first project looking at integrating a sewer diversion into a green infrastructure project to make the project do more both for the green infrastructure and for the water supply. So final thoughts are that all the projects that I've presented here today, and we anticipate future projects, will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution that if you do this, this is the right way to approach it. And so partnering early in the project development process usually can identify solutions that neither entity could have identified working alone. So the district's process of building this is sort of a preview for the presentations to come. It starts with setting up a stormwater services agreement so that the sanitation districts can work on the project consistent with our SB 485 authority. The first step is capacity analysis and consultations with the water masters and the flood control. There is a treatability review by our reuse and compliance section. The next speaker, Erika, will discuss that. After that, an industrial waste permit is submitted, and in the industrial waste section, develops the permit and does those reviews. There's a review by our sewer design section to look at the specifics of the connection to make sure that our sewer is protected. And then if the project has any portion, whether or not it connects to the sewer, actually any project that would be in a right-of-way of our sewer's right-of-way, we do a build-over review to make sure that project won't negatively impact our sewer. And then when those steps are done, you can move towards final approval. And so the next person that I will introduce is Erika Bensch. She's the division engineer for our reuse and compliance section, and she'll be able to talk to you about the water quality analysis at our treatment plants and water rights considerations.
Sorry. Thank you, Kristen. Good morning. Being in the reuse and compliance section of our agency, we are responsible for ensuring that our treatment plants are operating and discharging and reusing the water according to local, state, and federal rules and regulations, and according to the permit issued by the local regional water quality control board. And we also compile monitoring and compliance reports that are due to the various regulating agencies. We also manage our water recycling program here at the districts, which entails administering the recycled water contracts, inspecting reuse sites, tracking flow, and other duties. Today, I will discuss the recycled water related issues to consider if you're diverting a stormwater into our sewer and treatment system. You've seen a map similar to this one in Kristen's presentation, which depicts our wastewater service area and 11 wastewater treatment plants. One thing to consider when planning a diversion project is with which treatment plant system should we be concerned with. Today, I will focus on the southern plants that make up our joint outfall system. Here's a closer view of the system and the associated treatment plants serving 5 million people in interconnecting 73 cities. The flow values here indicate how much or how many million gallons per day on average the plants took in 2020. And we indicate where the resulting treated effluent is delivered. Purple pipe, and purple is the color of recycled water, as you may know, indicates water that was delivered to a distribution system for uses such as irrigation, commercial, and industrial purposes. And then groundwater recharge refers to projects that are aimed at replenishing the underground potable water supplies. And then discharge indicates water that was released to the local surface water bodies. And I will also note that our Joint Water Pollution Control Plant, which we call JW for short, discharges to the ocean right now, but we are contemplating ways to recycle that water as well. When the applicable treatment plant has been identified, we have to consider whether there is enough flow capacity at the plant and treatment capacity at the plant to take in the new flow. Maybe there's not enough capacity at a plant like Whittier Narrows at the time, but in that case, maybe the flow bypasses and goes down to our JW plant. And we have to consider whether there's capacity there. We have to examine also the daily flow fluctuations or diurnal curve for the plant, and potentially the diversion, the diversions by diurnal curve, and determine if there's enough treatment capacity during all times of the day, or maybe certain times or preferred times of the day. Another consideration is what is the destination of the water being produced by the plant? Is it discharged to a local water body or reused, or for what purpose? Depending on those answers, we have to consider water quality objectives, limits, and impacts. Oh, sorry. So one way to help identify which plant the proposed project would be flowing towards is to visit our website, lacsd.org, or you can go directly to this website or this web address listed right here. And we have a map tool that will help delineate the sewer shed, which is kind of like a watershed, but involving sewers. That for each plant, and then you can help to identify, this will help you identify where your project is located and which plant the flow would be traveling towards. Here we have our San Jose Creek water reclamation plant as an example, and its sewer shed. And then, of course, our staff can help verify that the correct sewer treatment plant is identified for your project. Another process to consider is samples would need to be collected of the proposed the proposed water diversion and be analyzed to determine water quality, so that we, the sanitation districts, can examine whether the water has the potential to negatively impact our sewers, our treatment plant processes, or which rely on the microbes, as Steve mentioned, and we definitely don't want them to go on a hunger strike or die. And then also we have to be concerned with our discharge and the uses of the recycled water that is produced. We want to ensure our treated water will not cause harm to the human health or the environment. And the results of the sampling analysis will help us in that determination. So what constituents should we be concerned with for monitoring? Well, here's a list of analytes that we provide to our project proponents for them to characterize the water proposed for the diversion. Here we have a list of metals, organics, salts, and other parameters. When you provide the results of these analyses, we will run them through calculations to determine whether there will be any impacts to, or what would be the projected influent and effluent water quality. And many of these constituents, the monitoring for these are driven by our requirements to meet aquatic life criteria if we're discharging to the local surface water body, or drinking water standards if the recycled water is provided for a potable reuse project. For example, we would like to know the dissolved sulfides content to evaluate potential impacts to our sewers and to our other facilities. And then also we'd like to know our chemical oxygen demand and soluble solids to understand whether there would be, what the load would be to our treatment processes. And also we'd like to know total dissolved solids content to know whether there would be any, whether the concentrations are low enough and that they would not impact the discharge to the surface water bodies or for reuse purposes. Another thing to consider is whether the diversion planning needs to address water rights. And as you know, in California, water is for fighting. You will need to consider whether someone has downstream rights to the water proposed for the diversion, and also they probably, those parties would need to be consulted, or do you need to apply for water diversion rights? We highly recommend checking out the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Water Rights website. And they have a frequently asked questions page on their website, and also helpful tools such as this mapping tool to help identify downstream water rights holders. In considering whether the proposed water diversion will impact existing water rights, you may need to identify whether the project overlays or is upgradient of one of the existing adjudicated groundwater basins where groundwater has already been spoken for. The California Department of Water Resources has yet another mapping tool. I really like mapping tools, as you can see. This can help you identify which are the relevant adjudicated basins and help you to determine which water master or water masters you may need to consult with. It may be the case that a project project diversion overlies one groundwater basin, but could impact another groundwater basin. And that's something else to take into consideration. Here are some relevant water master websites that can help you better understand the groundwater basins and how they're adjudicated, and also can provide some contact information. And of course, we can also provide contact information for you. And I also wanted to mention that a question has come up to who owns the water rights of the recycled water that is produced. And well, we have to take the responsibility of managing the water coming into our plants. That includes treatment, discharge, and reuse of the water. And this is any water that comes into our collection systems and treatment systems. And that's per California Water Code section 1210. That gives us the rights to the water. When it comes to managing the water after treatment, we have to evaluate whether the water must be discharged to support downstream habitat needs, and in that case, we have to consult with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the State Water Board per section California Water Code section 1211. Or maybe the water can be beneficially reused for other purposes, whereby we look at our existing recycled water sales contracts and with our water partners and reusers, or maybe there's other new opportunities for other reuse projects. In any case, we are very excited and enthusiastic because stormwater and dry weather diversion projects can contribute to the recycled water supply, which is especially important in this arid region. And now I will hand it off to Peter, who will discuss our industrial waste section's concerns.
Thank you, Erika. My presentation today is going to cover the design elements of a stormwater diversion facility, an overview of the industrial wastewater permit application process, fees charged by the sanitation districts, and water quality monitoring requirements for permittees. Here we have a diagram of a typical stormwater diversion facility. As you can see, it starts at an intake structure, which is a barrier installed across a storm drain to divert stormwater into a trash collection manhole. The trash collection manhole will have a built-in bar screen capable of preventing trash and debris larger than 3/8 of an inch from passing through, and then a storage basin captures and impounds the stormwater for discharge at a later time. The stormwater is generally permitted to be discharged 24 hours after a rain event and during off-peak hours between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. However, limited exceptions to discharge restrictions may be granted on a case-by-case basis. Stormwater facilities are required to have pump discharge. Gravity flow is not allowed due to it being more difficult to control, and therefore submersible pumps are installed in a wet well, which should be variable speed so they can be modulated to avoid unnecessarily high peak flows. An air gap is installed downstream of the pumps to prevent establishment of a siphon, and to shut down discharge in case of a sewer emergency or prevent wet weather discharge from facilities with impound requirements. An automatic shutoff valve is installed between the stormwater storage tank and the pump well. Stormwater facilities may discharge the first 1/10 of an inch of rainwater to the sewer. And after that, those that are required to impound stormwater for 24 hours have an automatic rain collector and switch capable of detecting the first 1/10 of an inch of rain. The collector is installed in an open area near the pump well, and the rain switch automatically closes the shutoff valve and de-energizes the discharge pumps during wet weather. The stormwater is then held in the storage tank until pumping resumes. Potentially real-time stormwater facilities would not have a rain switch, but would have other controls to prevent a sanitary sewer overflow. A combustible gas monitoring system is installed to protect against explosion hazards. If, for example, a gasoline spill were to occur upstream of the diversion facility, The gas detector is connected to a continuous recorder and must be capable of shutting down flow to the sewer automatically at 20% of the LEL, or lower explosive limit. From the wet well, the water is pumped to a monitoring facility that houses the flow meter and sampling point, which are used for compliance monitoring and user fee billing. If a vault is being constructed, it should not exceed 3.5 feet in depth for safety reasons and needs to be located such that it's accessible to the district's employees. The flow meter will have a non-resettable totalizer, a display for instantaneous flow rate, and continuous recorder to document the peak flows, and it must be calibrated prior to the start of discharge and then at regular intervals thereafter. Specifically, hydraulic calibrations are performed every 3 years and instrument calibrations once per year. Flow pacing socket for an automatic sampler should be located within 10 feet of the flow meter if possible. And a check valve is installed on the pressurized discharge pipe to prevent backflow. And lastly, before the public sewer connection is a pressure brake manhole that serves as both the air gap and gas trap to prevent sewer gases from entering the stormwater project. Stormwater facilities should also plan to install telemetry that will interface with the district's SCADA system at our Long Beach, Maine pumping plant. This is to allow continuous monitoring by the sanitation districts and a remote shutdown of the discharge in a sewer emergency, such as an impending overflow in the downstream sewer. The telemetry system will have to pass a functional testing before the diversion facility can start discharging. Specific equipment and telemetry related setup questions may be directed to either of these two contacts listed here on the slide. Oops. Now let's look at the industrial waste permit application process. All stormwater projects connected to the sanitation district sewer system must first obtain an industrial wastewater discharge permit before the start of construction. Discharge permits are issued jointly by the sanitation districts and local agency, which is either the city with jurisdiction at the point of discharge or the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works. The first step is to submit an application package to the local agency, a list of which and their contact information is available on the district's website at the bottom of the industrial waste permits page. The local agency will review and approve the application if it's complete and meets their local requirements. And most local agencies will also require payment of a processing fee before approving a permit. Once approved, the local agency signs and forwards it directly to the sanitation districts for review. The sanitation districts then takes typically about 30 days to process and approve a permit, with the caveat that the applicant respond promptly to any questions which may come up during the review. And in its evaluation, the district reviews the application to ensure the pretreatment and monitoring equipment meet our requirements, verify flow rates and sewer capacity, and establish permit limitations and conditions. As Kristen mentioned earlier, local governmental diversions are exempt from connection fees, but if the project does not fall into that category, then a connection fee is calculated and must be paid before the permit is issued. And I'll cover more on sewer fees shortly, but moving on, the approved permit and plans are then returned to the local agency with a copy sent to the permittee. The permit consists of 3 main parts, which is a cover letter, a requirement list, which is the list of permit conditions, and a permit data sheet, which has the specific pollutant limitations, flow limits, and monitoring requirements. The permits are issued with a duration of 5 years. And while the permit is in effect, the permittee should expect a minimum of 1 compliance inspection per year and to perform semi-annual self-monitoring for substances of concern and sewer use fees. The districts will also sample the discharge a minimum once per year. And lastly, the districts will mail a permit renewal letter approximately 6 months prior to the expiration, and the permittee then submits a new application and the process repeats. The renewal process is substantially the same, except not all original supporting information such as plans are necessary unless changes are proposed. The permit application consists of 5 forms, which are available to download from the district's website or by calling the industrial waste section for a hard copy. Now, keep in mind that the application is designed for a variety of manufacturing and industrial type facilities, and therefore not all the information asked for on the forms is applicable to a stormwater facility. But if you have any questions or need help filling out the application, please contact the industrial waste permit staff. The application form is the most important as it lists the legal name of the permittee, the organization type, any corporate information, the location and mailing address, and also provides information on the proposed wastewater, including the estimated flow rates and pollutants. And it's the one form signed by the applicant, the local agency, and the sanitation districts, and becomes part of the approved permit. The applicant questionnaire is relatively straightforward and provides basic information such as the type of the permit application, whether it's a new permit, a renewal or revision, and the contact person information. Form B documents the flow rate estimated on the application and how it was determined. For facilities not yet in operation, an addendum to the Form B should be submitted with the estimation procedure. And Form C is to list the chemical tanks and verify adequate spill containment if there's any. And then Form D is just a checklist to help the applicant ensure all the forms and supporting information are submitted. The application form should be accompanied by plans and supporting information. The drawings will include a detailed sewerage plan drawn to scale with all sewer lines, associated wastewater facilities, from the intake structure to the public sewer connection, a plot plan of the facility with the adjacent streets and north orientation, equipment plans, drawings of the wastewater monitoring facilities with the flow meter, sample point, and monitoring equipment locations. Any spill containment structures such as chemical storage areas, and detailed flow meter plans, including the upstream and downstream piping. And of course, plans for the rainwater management and combustible gas monitoring systems. And in addition to the drawings, the application should have a description of the diversion projects, such as the purpose and scope of the work, operations and procedures, flow estimation method, and also a map of the drainage area with all the tributary NPDES permits identified, catalog cuts of all the equipment with flow meter, gas monitoring, and rainwater management systems, and safety data sheets for any chemicals that are going to be used. And lastly, the wastewater test results from the pre-project sampling mentioned by Erika earlier should be submitted with the permit application. Now, a little about the costs associated with the industrial waste permits. The district has two main revenue programs for industrial dischargers. The connection fee is a one-time fee of all new users of the sanitation district sewer system, as well as existing users that increase the quantity or strength of their discharge by more than 25%. The connection fee funds capital facilities that increase sewer and treatment plant capacity. It bears repeating that local governmental diversions are not charged connection fees, but if a stormwater project is not owned by a local agency, it will be assessed a connection fee based on the average daily flow rate and strength of the wastewater. Second revenue program called surcharge is an annual sewer use fee that reimburses the districts for ongoing wastewater collection, treatment, and disposal costs. All permittees, including stormwater projects that discharge over 1 million gallons per year or have high strength wastewater, file and pay annual surcharge. Permittees with flows less than 6 million gallons can elect to file either a short or long form surcharge statement. The primary difference being that long form filers have additional sampling requirements for chemical oxygen demand and suspended solids, and potentially peak flow charges. Facilities that discharge over 6 million gallons a year or have high strength must file long form. Stormwater diversions typically have lower strength wastewater and therefore generally will pay less filing the long form if there's a choice. It's important to keep in mind the costs during the planning stages to minimize the operating costs later. Some ways to lower the surcharge costs are reducing the COD and suspended solids, using pretreatment, and by lessening or eliminating peak flow charges by maintaining steady flow rate during peak hours, or alternatively discharging only between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. when peak flow charges don't apply. And the last topic I'll cover briefly is the ongoing sampling after the permit is issued. There are two types, self-monitoring and surcharge sampling. Self-monitoring reports are due semi-annually for substances including pH, COD, suspended solids, dissolved sulfides, and any of the pollutants of concern determined during the permit evaluation. They will also be listed on the permit data sheet and on blank self-monitoring reports forms, which are mailed to the permittee prior to each reporting period. The sanitation districts will also sample a minimum of once per year or twice for long-form filers. And in addition, long-form filers take additional samples for COD and suspended solids based on the annual flow volume. The frequency ranges from quarterly for less than 15 million gallons a year of discharge up to twice per week for over 250 million gallons a year of discharge. The surcharge sampling schedule is listed on the permit data sheet and is to help ensure that the strength and the flows are representative of the discharge throughout the year. And lastly, because the standard surcharge sampling requirements may not adequately address the seasonal and irregular nature of stormwater discharges, the permittee may be authorized to implement a modified testing schedule to ensure that the sampling is representative of both wet and dry weather periods. And I do believe that these presentations will be available after the webinar, so I included some links here to the permit forms and guidelines for many of the topics I covered very quickly today on the Sanitation Districts website. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rosann and her presentation on considerations for design and best practices.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. My presentation will cover the requirements and design considerations for the direct connections to the district's trunk sewer. The district's wastewater ordinance requires approval of sewer plans for all connections over 6 inches within the district service area where any existing or proposed wastewater flows discharge directly or indirectly to the district's trunk sewer system. The district's engineering counter in the sewer design section is responsible for reviewing and approving these types of connections. What is considered a direct connection? These are 4 to 6 inch diameter house or lateral connections and 8 inch or larger diameter sewer connections to the district's trunk sewers. As mentioned in the previous slide, anything over 6 inches will require plan review and approval by the districts. We require that 8 inch and larger sewer lines connect to either an existing manhole or by construction of a new manhole. Connection to an existing manhole is preferred and more cost effective, provided that the manhole is in fairly good condition and that there is enough room in the manhole to make this connection. One thing to keep in mind is that the district only owns and maintains the connection at the manhole. Any portion of the proposed sewer upstream of the connection to the district's trunk sewer is the responsibility of the owner or agency. These connections are located in public right-of-way or can also be in private right-of-way, in which case the district's trunk sewer is typically located within an easement. For connections within private right-of-way, an additional build-over review will be required. Once we have determined that the connection to the district's trunk sewer is feasible, a sewer plan and profile will need to be prepared and submitted to the sewer design section for review. The plans will need to include a manhole detail showing the proposed connection to the district's existing manhole or proposed, along with the applicable notes and the district's signature block on the cover page. Handouts detailing these requirements are available by request from the engineering counter. The plans will need to be signed by a civil, chemical, or structural engineer registered in California. Review of the plans will take about 3 to 4 weeks. Once review of the plans is complete and plans have been finalized, prior to the sewer design section signing off on the direct connection, we check to make sure all other permits and approvals have been obtained. For example, for these stormwater flow diversion projects, we make sure that the industrial waste discharge permit has been issued and all other requirements have been met before we sign off and approve the direct connection to the trunk sewer. Per our wastewater ordinance, we are the last agency to sign off on the plans. The city or agency that will own and maintain the local sewer line will have to sign the plans before the districts sign off. Prior to the construction of the connection, all submittals pertaining to the construction on the district sewer should be provided to the sewer design section for review and approval. These include manhole shoring, manhole submittal, flow-through plug, and any other items listed on the plans. You should allow about 3 to 4 weeks for review of these submittals. Lastly, during construction, the districts will be providing inspection for all work related to the construction of the direct connection. The following is a list of design considerations to keep in mind when preparing the sewer plans for the direct connection. These are items that we particularly check for during the plan review process. Prior to connecting to the district's trunk sewer, any force main or pressurized connection should break to gravity. The alignment of the proposed sewer should be such that the connection comes in perpendicular to the district's trunk sewer. The invert elevation of the proposed sewer should be designed such that the water surface elevation matches the water surface elevation of the trunk sewer at the design flow depth. We do not allow drop connections. At the district's trunk sewer, any drop connections should be located upstream before the connection to the district's trunk sewer. The slope for the portion of the proposed sewer that connects to the district's trunk sewer should be designed such that it meets a minimum velocity of 2 feet per second to prevent deposition of solids and no more than 10 feet per second to prevent possible erosion and excessive turbulence. If construction of a new manhole is required to connect to the trunk line, the size and type of manhole will be determined based on the existing trunk sewer and the proposed sewer diameter and the depth of cover. Typically, if an existing trunk sewer is 30 inches or less in diameter, a 48-inch type D manhole is sufficient for depth of cover greater than 6 feet. For larger diameter sewers, and for larger connections, a larger manhole such as our 60-inch diameter manhole E may be necessary. Also, depending on whether the existing sewer is lined or not, a special detail may be required for liner termination at the new manhole wall. Another factor to consider is the amount of flow in the existing trunk sewer and whether the flow can be contained in a flow-through plug when making the proposed connection and completing any channelization of the manhole base in the dry. In some situations where the existing sewer has high sewer flows and a much larger diameter and the flows cannot be contained in a flow-through or cannot be diverted or bypassed, a precast channel may be required. An example of where a precast channel was required was on the Carriage Crest project that Kristen described earlier. Here is an example of a profile showing the force main breaking to gravity at a drop manhole upstream prior to discharging to the district's manhole. We typically require that the pipe material is transitioned to VCP at the district's manhole connection. Here is an example of the manhole detail that is required to be on the plans. The schematic on the left shows a proposed 48-inch diameter manhole D on the district's existing 24-inch diameter RCP trunk sewer and a proposed 8-inch sewer connection. The picture on the right shows the construction of a new manhole base being formed for a new connection to an existing trunk sewer. As you can see, the existing pipe is still left intact while the manhole base is formed around the existing pipe. Here is a list of some of the sewer connections for the stormwater diversion projects discussed by Kristen earlier that sewer design has reviewed. I won't be going over the specifics of each of these projects, but as you can see, depending on the existing sewer and size of the proposed connection and whether there is a nearby existing manhole to connect to, the details and requirements for each sewer connection can vary. Some sewer plan reviews may require more time and may need specific details. In summary, most of the requirements and design considerations I discussed during this presentation are general guidelines, and to keep in mind that project-specific details may be necessary for your particular project or situation. So if considering a direct connection to the district's trunk sewer, please consult with the sewer design section during the early phase of the design so that these factors can be discussed in more detail. Next, Danielle Thomas from our property management group will talk to you more about the build-over review process.
Great. Thank you very much, Rosann. There we go. Okay, awesome. So yes, as Rosann mentioned, I'll be talking to you about buildovers and our process for protecting our sewers. And so we typically look for, whenever we do a buildover review, it is required, a hard requirement anytime there is construction within or near our sewer easements. This is a mandatory requirement. There's really no way out of it unless you have a direct sewer connection, in which you would work with our sewer design section, or if you are in the public right of way. Otherwise, this will be a mandatory requirement at no cost to the project team. And things we typically look for: any large buildings, any large underground stormwater infrastructure, any really deep vertical excavations right outside our easement, anything that can really threaten the integrity or stability of our sewers. And also things that we'll look for immediately: any trees in our easement, that is absolutely not allowed. And we often ask about what equipment you plan to use, because we do not allow any equipment with a loading greater than what is listed on the screen. But overall, we will look for anything and everything, and we do have a rigorous review process. And so a very great first step is to just go to the link shown there, LACSD Underground Utilities. It's a GIS kind of Google Maps based web application where you can search by address and see if there are any district sewers on your property. Often someone will email me, they say, we have this sewer. It turns out there's actually 2 or 3 on the property. So this is a great first step. And then once you get your construction plans finalized and you fill out a buildover application, then you can send that to me. So the buildover application is shown here. One second. There we go. You can find this if you just type in LACSD buildovers in Google. They will have a lot of insight over our buildover procedures, and you can also download this buildover application. This will serve as a guide for the buildover review process. And once you send this to us with your plans, often myself or another buildover coordinator will give you some preliminary revisions. Anything that we catch right away that will be a problem, we'll send it back. And then after that period, once the construction plans are ready for a full buildover review, we send it to 3 different engineering sections for review. There, they'll be looking to evaluate any additional loadings, the existing conditions of our sewer, the potential contingents that will be created as a result of the proposed construction. We always look to make sure we're going to maintain access and operation of our sewers and manholes during construction, and also once the construction is complete. These are the things we'll be looking for. This process usually takes about 4 weeks. And once the review is completed, one thing we may often ask as a result is to do a CCTV inspection. But this is on a case-by-case basis. It often depends on the existing conditions of our sewer and the project scope that's being proposed. And once everything is approved, the construction is approved, the plans are approved, then we will issue our buildover review letter and a buildover agreement. A recorded buildover agreement will typically be required for any stormwater projects. This agreement is recorded with the county clerk against the property, and we do also require notarized signatures, typically the owner of the property and then our district's chief engineer. But for agencies and cities, often getting the signature can take more time depending on who is authorized to sign it. So keep that in mind and when you're budgeting for time. And once everything is approved and the agreement is finalized, then you can move on to construction within our easement area. Inspectors are required to be there on site anytime construction activities are occurring within the easement area. This is another hard requirement. Our inspectors are very accommodating. The only days they don't go out is on a Sunday. We typically ask 2 weeks notice, but they can be there with as little as 1 week notice. Like I said, we're very accommodating because this is a very hard requirement for every project that will be occurring within our easements. And with everything I've listed, you may be wondering how long this all takes. The minimum time requirement for districts is 2 months. That does not account for the time of the project team to respond to our comments, to revise any plans. All of that takes additional time. So you can budget for maybe around 3 months, maybe longer, depending on the complexity of the project. A question we often get asked is, can we expedite the process? The answer is no. Unfortunately, we cannot expedite this process at all. One thing that the proposing team can do is to make sure all of their plans are already meeting our requirements and to respond quickly to any comments or revisions that we require. That is how the process can be sped up. So to walk through some examples, Alondra Park mentioned earlier, we had an underground stormwater management system in Lawndale, in addition with buried utilities and curb and paving. This resulted in a recorded build-over agreement. We also required the construction of a new manhole, and specifically we required the drop manhole to be constructed upstream of our connection because we do not allow any drop manholes at our connection. And of course, an inspection was required. Then we have another underground stormwater capture system in Whittier, also mentioned earlier. We also had some grading adjustments with this project. This resulted in a recorded build-over agreement. We also required a CCTV inspection specifically for this project. We had some specific requirements for the manhole construction. And this is a unique project because we originally required a concrete encasement of a pretty long stretch of our sewer. And through working with the project team, with them making some changes to their construction plans and us doing some further evaluations of our sewers, we were able to find a happy medium with the specific requests of support and protection of our sewers in place during construction. So a great example of the districts working with the project team to have a happy solution. And lastly, we have another stormwater project in the City of Industry that also included some grading adjustments. This resulted in a recorded build-over agreement. However, this is a really unique project. They actually did the first phase of their work in 2018. That resulted in a recorded build-over agreement from the build-over review process. This year, 3 years later, they came with the second phase of their project and hoped they could amend the original build-over agreement. This was not an option. This will not be an option. Unfortunately, they had to go through a second build-over review and have a second recorded build-over agreement. However, as you can see, there were no specific requests added. That's because for the second phase of their project, all of the major construction had significant vertical and horizontal clearance from our sewers and were outside of our easement. The only work actually being done within our easement was some minor grading adjustments. So as a result, the build-over review process was really simple. It was pretty quick. We had no specific requests, and it was overall a really simple and painless process for them. So that's the goal. That's the gold standard. Just take all of the major construction out of our sewer easements, and we typically won't have any issues. But still, of course, an inspection was required because that is a hard requirement for every single build-over project. And with that, I am happy to turn it back over to Kristen, who will give a further wrap up of our discussion here.
Hi, I'm just trying to bring my screen back. So hopefully you can see what I have on screen. So when we started talking about planning this workshop, we felt it was useful to walk you through the various steps of this process to give you a flavor for what's to come and and specifically that you should be starting with us early. And so going back to this district's process, you've heard from each of these sections. And if you are interested in evaluating a sewer diversion and incorporating one into your project, we have found that people are starting to look at using them in combination with green infrastructure, where if you have an infiltration project and maybe you want to preserve that infiltration rate by not gumming it up with dry weather flows, that would be someplace where you might want to consider a sewer diversion. I mentioned earlier that Long Beach is looking at a diversion at the tail end of a wetland, again, to take up care of the rest of the pollutants from the otherwise green infrastructure program. And I think there are probably other options, but come talk to us. And with that, I will turn it back over to the moderators to handle questions.
If everybody kind of comes back up, we've got everybody. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Mark and Steve. You answered a number of questions that we know our participants had. You also raised a number of other questions that we're going to get to, and in the limited time that we have today, I'm going to remind folks to put questions in the Q&A. Use the chat to introduce yourself and your affiliation if you haven't done so yet. It's always good to kind of see who's in the room. And we'll make sure that whatever questions that we can't get to in the remaining time, we'll pass along to Kristen and her team, as well as to Mark and Steve to answer, and we'll get those back up on the website. The recording will be available on our website, so look for that. We'll let you know soon enough when that happens. So let's, there was a lot of technical information provided, and we had technical in the title of the webinar. So yeah, hit all that technical process, all the different elements. There's a lot of information that was covered. And so again, the recording will certainly allow folks to go back and dive in a little bit deeper. We do have a number of questions for you. The first one I want to kind of start off with is one that came up when we had our initial conversations around misconceptions around diversions. And I think, again, some of the presentation material hit that. I want to make sure that if there's other misunderstandings or misconceptions about diversions, we kind of get those kind of addressed here. And so Kristen and Danielle and Erika, Rosann, Peter, are there anything that you didn't have a chance to cover in your presentations that you'd like to make sure that we walk away with understanding very clearly today?
No. So I think the primary thing that I want people to walk away with is start talking to us early, so that you're not operating on assumptions. We find that people run into the most trouble when they're operating on assumptions and they come to us at the end of the process under a time pressure and a little bit confused.
Thanks, Kristen. Hey, I want to kind of come back, if I could, to Mark, because I know that maybe it's just the world that I live in. The issue of MS4 compliance has been a really big deal. I know, particularly going back through the campaign with Measure W, and I hear it particularly from cities. So Mark, I'm curious, what are the future of diversions and the role within that MS4 compliance toolbox? Are there any lessons that we can learn from other regions as we look to address that? I know you've got multi-facets of, the multi-benefit of the program, but for those that are really interested in that compliance element, what kind of examples do you have you can share?
Sure, and then maybe I'll put on my LA County hat to respond to this question. So as part of our stormwater program, as part of our MS4 permit compliance efforts, we really want to maximize groundwater recharge. And so our best bet has always been, do some extensive soil investigations, find out what we're able to do on the site. And our preference is always, infiltrate, using infiltration galleries or dry wells. And then if the conditions don't allow for that, then we would look at other options. Kristen had mentioned diversions to sewer. And then we've also implemented projects that actually are doing on-site treatment and reuse for irrigation. And so diversions, we feel is one of the key tools because, again, whether you're here in LA or in other parts of the state, we all are facing different kind of geologic conditions, soil conditions. And so it's important to be able to utilize different techniques, different BMPs to be able to, like I said, capture that stormwater. So for us here in LA County, we've implemented different methodologies, different BMPs, and I think we've covered some of the ones that are tapping into the stormwater systems. We have a couple of them that are in design phase, and so we're really excited with the different options available in that toolbox.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. That, having those different tools in that toolbox is certainly related to achieving MS4 compliance is important. And we're wanting to look at how we get those multiple benefits at these projects. And I think there's a number of examples of how we can start looking at these diversion projects to get there. There's a number of organizations that have been working towards green infrastructure and nature-based solutions as part of that solution. And those projects provide many community benefits. So when we start talking about the dry weather diversions, there's a question like, when do we look at those versus green infrastructure? How can those be matched together? And Kristen, you started you alluded to the fact that there's some of this underway now. So long way around to the question, how can we not divert money away from those green infrastructure and nature-based solutions? And how do we know when the dry weather diversions make sense? And so I'll pass that to you and certainly Mark and Steve, feel free to join in answering that.
So I'll go ahead and start. So I don't know that the sanitation districts are the ones directing whether or not your project makes sense. Typically, a project proponent they'd maybe start with a green infrastructure program, and then they would learn something about the project that they can't infiltrate as much as they thought they could. There's a plume underneath their site that they didn't expect. Something happens where they start to look at, we need another option, or they're looking at, my green infrastructure project will work great. However, there's pollutants coming out the back end of it that I'm facing regulatory pressure to handle. And so in some cases, a project, the diversion may be your plan B to something else. And in some cases, a diversion may be a supplement to make your green infrastructure project do the work it needs to do for water quality and make the green infrastructure project go forward.
And I could just jump in real quick. So for the projects that the county has led that involves stormwater diversions, Alondra Park and Adventure Park are just two examples where we do incorporate nature-based solutions to complement the diversion elements. There's still a need to increase green spaces, maximize LIDs to treat that surface runoff. And so the nature-based solutions are complementary pieces to some of the proposed diversion systems. And then ultimately, it just makes the project much more robust and comprehensive when you're able to add community enhancements that go beyond just what you're seeing from a water quality standpoint. So to circle back, I guess there's always opportunities to incorporate nature-based solutions in these.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that typically when you're looking at stormwater diversion to sewer, it's kind of the last option. As Mark has expressed, groundwater supplement's been explored, nature-based solutions have been explored, but sometimes there are certain constituents that we don't want to percolate into the ground, or it's a real urban setting without any real estate for green options. And that's when diversion to sewer makes sense.
So before we wrap, I want to kind of call out Erika. I want to come back because this was a point I know in our early discussion, I saw it in the chat, this issue about water rights. And I kind of have to want to make sure I emphasize the point here. So if you're selling reclaimed water, why does my agency have to pay sanitation district fees to divert water into the system? And is there a pass through for water rights? I mean, how do we really get at that so we don't get bound up around that particular issue?
Okay, so first of all, we are providing a service. We're providing a wastewater management service. So water comes into our sewer system. We decided we're going to manage that, and we'll take care of the treatment. We'll take care of any of the discharge and reuse regulations. So yes, so we're taking responsibility for that water. And as I mentioned before, California Water Code section 1210 says that we retain the water rights of that water once it enters our system. So water coming into our system is just not a drop for drop, like the water coming in and then the water leaves drop for drop the same amount. There's solids that are removed and processed in a different manner. So that's another issue to consider. And then, we do sell the recycled water to other users in many cases, but we are providing the service, and the water that is sold, the revenue from that goes into our calculations for operation and management, our O&M costs. And so we incorporate that into that to keep the rates low for the rate payers that are paying for the wastewater treatment management. So it all goes into the pot, so to keep the rates low. And so again, and also there is no pass-through rights. Hopefully that answers everything.
I had to ask the question, Erika. It's like, it's one of those things we can all get bound up in a big ball of knots.
Yep.
Let's see. I'm going to go back to the green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. There was a follow-up question that wanted to kind of come back to, and that is, so when we talk about nature-based solutions and the diversions, what considerations do we need to be thinking about with every diversion project? Maybe this goes to Kristen in terms of and Mark, in terms of how you've looked at making sure that those considerations are being addressed.
I could start.
Great.
Every time we do site assessments, we try to do an assessment in terms of what opportunities and space is available. We look at drainage patterns. So for example, when we're trying to maximize the use of LIDs, we try to understand, okay, the runoff from this parking lot, where does it go? Does it get picked up by the internal storm drain system, or does it just flow out into the street? And so we try to maximize and make sure that any surface runoff that's happening within that property or in the surrounding areas, if there's a way to pick it up and have it pass through bioswales and porous pavements, we try to take advantage of all available space. And then when you're looking at larger flows from adjacent storm drain systems, it's really not feasible to then put that back up on the ground and have it pass through bioswale. So the majority of those flows end up getting diverted into those underground systems.
And I would add to that, I think there's this thought that nature-based solutions and stormwater diversions are in competition with each other. I don't see it that way at all, is that sewer diversions actually can assist nature-based solutions getting to their water quality goals. And I know when LA County is developing projects, even though they might be developing a gray infrastructure project for a large storm drain, because as Mark said, it isn't feasible to put that through bioswales. They are looking at adding nature-based solutions on the surface so that the people who use that space get those multiple benefits.
Kristen, on that note, you've shared with me an example, and I'm hoping you can share that example of like how the partnering or the combination of the two has actually been used to help the downstream habitat. Is that something that you can share with others in terms of how diverting the stormwater flow from diverting the stormwater, cleaning it up, and then releasing it back in was a benefit versus that first flush, that large first concentrated flush going into the habitat? I hate to put you on the spot.
So
but I'm going to.
So I'm not sure that was an example from a sewer diversion. So typically for a sewer diversion, they would, if they're looking at first flush, they'd have to collect the first flush into some sort of storage. Those pollutants, they can put them into the sanitary sewer and we would treat them. Where that water ends up after treatment really depends on what's happening with the recycled water. Does it go into the purple pipe system? Does it go into the groundwater? Stormwater that makes its way into groundwater recharge through our system is often cleaner than stormwater that goes into groundwater recharge directly. And so that might be what you're talking about, but I can't say it's one-to-one that this water ends up in that same groundwater recharge.
I'll just add on to that if I think I understood your question. In other systems, Santa Ana River and other areas, there are cases of course, as we all know, where wastewater agencies are required to provide an environmental flow into the river to sustain habitat. And if there are stormwater diversions within that system, well, they're going to be collected and treated. The water is generally going to be of better quality than untreated stormwater and discharged back into the river, similar to what Kristen just answered.
I know, Eileen, did you want to kind of, I know you had one last question you want to try to get in here. I'm happy to ask it if
Yeah.
not, but this issue about climate change, just because the way we're talking about these multifaceted and this really intricate system we're trying to navigate to provide this overall benefit, I got to ask sort of that Captain Obvious question is, you know, we're talking all of these projections about climate change and these prediction about, you know, wildly variable rainfall and how that will affect our ability to size wet weather diversions. And this, you know, this complicated intermingling between stormwater and flood control and how do we capture and really utilize this resource? How do you see that, you know, those projections with more extreme weather events coming and how we manage that and how we then still take advantage of doing these kind of diversion projects and opportunities? And that's really for the whole group to kind of take a shot at.
Well, I'll go ahead and say that really diversion projects are a combination of both halves. It's the project proponent, the MS4 permittee, with whatever their design storm is. And that really is not on the sewer agency side, it's more on Mark Lombos' side. And then once they have that design storm and how they capture it, the more extreme storms affect the size of their storage, because we from what we can take is somewhat fixed. We don't get more capacity, you know, with larger storms. And so they would have to bleed it into us either over a longer period of time, or if they're time limited by how long they can store it, they need larger storage. But it's not the sanitation district agency that directs that. It's more the MS4 permittees working with whatever their design storm and permit requirements are.
Well, Stephen or Mark, you guys want to try to tackle that?
I'll jump in real quick and Mark can finish up. Usually, well, as mentioned, there's always tight controls on the amount of water that's going to go into the wastewater system. So if storms are more intense or even beyond the design level, those controls are still there to only accept the safe amount into the wastewater system. So the rest is going back into the flood control or stormwater system. And usually when you see these kind of capture type basins, there's always an overflow that just goes right back into the flood control or stormwater conveyance system for cases of real intense storms. But this is all very new. We've been designing for 10 or 50 or 100-year storms for many, many years. And All of a sudden now it's like, well, maybe we need to start looking at 500-year storms. But the more nature-based solutions, the more capture systems we can add along the system will help attenuate those flows. They may be small and only have a marginal effect, but they will help.
I think that's a great point, Steve. The more of these stormwater capture systems we have in place scattered throughout the watershed, they would have a cumulative effect of being able to attenuate some of these kind of extreme, out of the ordinary peak events. And then I think the sanitation districts also touched on the use of real-time systems, being able to kind of adapt how things are being operated, either both from the stormwater side or the sewer side. I think that that would be a tool that would help us be able to adjust accordingly when those kind of out of the ordinary rainfall events do happen. And so, these are some of the things that, on the county side, we're going to be looking into and watching closely in terms of how our projects are responding to those types of events. And then we'll be coordinating that with the sanitation districts as well, and making sure that, their systems are not kind of being overly stressed during those times. So.
Well, I want to thank you all for that, because it's just by way of wrapping up. I kind of draw back. I had a long tenure in the electric utility business. I watched how that business really transformed over the last 20 years. I see very much the same thing within this water sector, and focuses like this on opportunities, but then really getting down like we did today into the details of how functionally does it work is, in fact, more critical, I think, often than those that would just project sort of that visionary top line. It's great for a bumper slogan to say, hey, we ought to do X. But forums like this one is where we kind of really drill down, okay, what does it mean? How does it work? What are the relationships? What are the processes and controls? Because it's not just about, the top line, it's about making it work and making it work for the customers ultimately that we all serve. And I want to say thank you on behalf of the Water Coalition, Eileen and others, for allowing us to participate in this. Every time I do this, I learn something. I will never pretend to be an expert in this topic. That's why I need all of you to kind of guide us. So I appreciate that. And I apologize if my questions sometimes are a little too generic, but if I can understand it, I figure the constituencies we're trying to help bring to these programs and understand what their value is, we kind of get there together. So I want to say thank you to all of you today. And Eileen, I'm going to turn it back over to you to give us the golden words of wrap up for today's session.
Thank you, Charlie. And yes, thank you, Kristen and Mark and Steve, Peter and Danielle, Rosann, Erika. It's been great having you all here. We like to bring together the different perspectives. This is what the council originated in terms of bringing together agencies to kind of talk through these processes. We as an organization are learning more about this tool, and we look forward to learning more, bringing more folks together. We've already talked about having some follow-up conversations because there's so much more to talk about related to this issue, as well as how it is one of the tools in the toolboxes that we need to be thinking more about as we go forward, looking at all the options for how we manage stormwater, how we bring benefits to our communities, and how we improve watershed health. So with that, we'll again make sure that we post the webinar, that we post the questions and get those back out to representatives and our participants. I'd like to thank all of you again, and my staff who's in the background, making sure everything is running smoothly. It's been great to have everyone here. And I think this is a first for us. We had a hard stop at 11 o'clock and we're just about there. So thank you all again. And it's been great having all of you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting this on. Great program.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.